very buoyed by all of this. So today I'm going to talk about kind of my world that I've been building in collaboration with my partner Rudy and many friends and archive collections and ghosts and all of that. So thinking about, I called it invisible geographies. So this is what I like to start most of my artist talks with, and my parents are here. I'm a Louisville native. I was gone for almost a decade. Went to school in central New York at Cornell, then Iowa, lived in Chicago. But I like to come back to things that tell me, especially I teach young people now. When I was around 9 years old, I made this schematic drawing of an Egyptian boat. So you can see, hopefully you can see, it's a glitter crayon. We have a material guide, we have kind of an exploded diagram and different phases of connecting and disconnecting these materials and explanation of how things would go. And I think I've always been, this was one of my favorite books growing up. Every good book needs a glossary and a series of maps. Dune had such a complex world and did such, what I thought at age 13, a poetic job of describing how everything worked. It became something that I thought about a lot. Like how can a map illustrate a world of possibilities? I love this quote of a floating secondary invisible geography, and thinking, extending that to like any map that you look at. So, growing up in Louisville, we could look at two maps of Louisville that have huge impact on the people who lived in those spaces. So on the left-hand side, you see Louisville and its defenses during the Civil War. Actually, in Smoketown, where my home and studio is, we have another print that shows that there was a defense trench that ran through our backyard, and that'll come up again in another couple minutes. And then, of course, we have a redlining map. And if you haven't seen these were federal documents by the Homeowners Loan Corporation in the 1930s that deemed neighborhoods and spaces lendable or not lendable based on a host of factors, including race, primarily race. And therefore had the impact of excluding people from spaces and a host of other environmental and social impacts ricochet today, almost 100 years later. So thinking about the invisible geography of a map, how we structure knowledge, how we promote ideas. I work primarily with printmaking, and I went to art school for printmaking. This is, I know how to do things that people have been doing for centuries, not as long as weaving, at least in the European Western world context. So this was how propaganda and religion and news and advertising, the printing press, of course, is the reason why people began to be able to read on a widespread basis and organize revolutions. But of course, printed media like maps have perspectives, they're performing realities, and they exercise power. Often, the maker is the powerful one, of course. So thinking about how print media like maps and diagrams, like the Egyptian boat of 1995, thinking about how print media structure knowledge. So this, I, for many years now, have been very interested in cyanotype printmaking, which you may have done as a sun print, maybe at summer camp. I think that's where I first learned about it. But this was actually the first scientific, fully illustrated book made by Anna Atkins in 1843. She scooted in right before William Henry Fox Talbot in 44. So these publishing scientific texts with these direct documents that are the truthiest truth you can get. this artist, she was a botanist, Anna Atkins coated paper with a light-sensitive solution that would turn blue when exposed to sunlight. And she would slap a moss or algae down on top of the sensitized paper. And then the sun would leave essentially a shadow of that object on the page, which meant that you got all the details without having maybe the questionable sense of the human hand, of a human making it. But of course we know we got the privilege, perspective, performance. Anything that a human has their hands laid on is going to have some kind of scheme or odd, maybe some idiosyncrasies. So this is one of my favorite surprise finds. I did a residency in Edinburgh, Scotland, and was poking around in an archive at the University of Edinburgh. And they had pulled out this huge, it was maybe like 30 inches in diameter, northern hemisphere of a globe. And it didn't have borders in the traditional national sense. And it had a system of symbols. You can't really see it very well, but the symbols had some relationship to weather, but the key, the legend, or any kind of diagram had long been lost. So there was this really special object that was being preserved, but its meaning had been totally obscured by time. So it really became, it looked like evidence of something, somebody's thinking. And it had an infographic kind of authority to it, but it was essentially, it left an impression or a gestalt or an abstraction, like some kind of impression on you of something. And I loved that idea, how you could just, have some kind of question, kind of like a scientific method. You have a hypothesis, you wonder something, and you see where it takes you. So I think that's how I organize my art making, is having a question and then seeing where it goes and what it looks like. So this was the Watershed Globe project. These are maps overlaid from 1793 to 2019. And this is a cyanotype, so very related to putting the algae on the sensitized paper. I found by talking on Instagram with some globe makers in France and Germany, software to translate a rectangular image to these pointed gores, which are what can then make a globe. So thinking back to that globe that I saw in Scotland, this tactile object that defines a space, provides access to something. You're looking around in a really embodied way, in a social way in the gallery space. But it's also like things change, things get made up. This is a globe that uses the Ohio River as its equator, so it's not even a global globe, it's a different take entirely. I got interested in celestial globes, so if you were a very wealthy, maybe main character bad guy in the 1800s or 1700s, if you bought a globe, you would get a pair of globes. You'd have a terrestrial globe, which is the earth, and then a celestial globe, which is the heavens. And so celestial globes are formatted from the perspective of being inside looking up at the heavens rather than the God's eye view looking down. And so I heard about planting by the signs when I was at Pine Mountain Settlement School in remote eastern Kentucky, and that I could just pick up a guide for my garden of this magical folk tradition that's centuries years old. I could just pick up a farmer's almanac and see how to plant, my beans according to the position of the moon with the constellations for healthy germination, because the pull of the moon has an impact on the germination of seeds. But I didn't want to do that. I really wanted to see if I could make a celestial globe of this process. So while I did pick up the Farmer's Almanac, this ended up being a challenge to illustrate with vegetables from my own garden how to plant by the signs. And so that was a fairly recent project I really loved making. And then here are just some views of it. This is called the Hydrodynamicon, kind of talking about like as if this folk practice could also be, it's about the cosmos. It's kind of sci-fi. So then kind of central to all this work was creating with my partner, who's also an artist, a structure by which to do that. So Calliope, which Rebecca mentioned, is a studio on the main floor of our house that I share with other people. And on the other side, so this building's a duplex, on the other side on the first floor is Rudy, and he is actually making tintypes right now as we speak. So he makes portraits with the 19th century method, wet plate collodion photography. Same equipment, more or less. He uses electricity, but it's very, very analog. And of course, we start thinking about everything surrounding wet plate collodion, like where did these images come from? As printmakers, we're interested in, this material history. And wet plate photography was like the second most important, or like second most significant innovation in photography in the 1850s. And it immediately went over into the realm of the supernatural. So there were ghost photographers. You can see the light ghostly figure behind there. People would bring images of their dead spouses, maybe Civil War, widespread grief and loss at about the same time as that technology emerging. So I've been thinking about, and I actually have some of these if you want to look at them later, I'll have them out. This is a book where I had AI serve as my research assistant to find writing by 19th century spiritualists about connecting with ghosts, and then 21st century people writing about tech and that same kind of disembodied, unaccountable kind of host to knowledge. So these are some images there. And then just briefly, I have a little newsletter on Substack that I'm still kind of trying to get a routine down on. But thinking about the tintype studio specifically, and all this work to get to know these craftspeople at the dawn of photography. There were women working as photographers and actually making a lot of money doing it in the 1880s, and then some doors shut rather rapidly afterward. By the turn of the century for them. So Sally Garrity, Rudy and I joke, is kind of the ghost of our studio. She had a studio just a few blocks from our building and did the very same process that Rudy does. And she had a photo portrait studio. She would document often women and children, but she also went to these expositions like the Chicago World's Fair, Southern Exposition. So I'm doing what I think will become, it's a graphic novel format. I'm illustrating the research that I do about her work as an entrepreneur in the 1880s in Louisville, in Chicago, in Los Angeles. She also worked as a journalist. And so these images, it's very much the conversation between me and her that's informed by work in archives, but also, Ouija board sessions. And, like, if I have a dream, I'll try and write about it, or I'll sit before dawn, before I go and teach school, and try and really just kind of go places of, putting together these historical anchors, these census records and genealogy, and where do I know things are? But again, it's this invisible geography of mapping where this could go, especially with a woman from history, only somewhat written about and then forgotten. And also kind of overlapping with the building itself and artifacts that we've dug up from the Civil War trench. And a privy, actually, which is a latrine that we dug. We found this coin. And so the man who owned the restaurant that had the token is the one who built our house. So these things that we find underground that then become these links or anchors to history and to historical people and stories. I'm just really interested in sharing that in a way that doesn't just have to be one object on the wall in an exhibition. It can be something that's more expansive and reveals more of the process. So that's kind of where I am right now. It's an exciting time, kind of learning what the heck graphic novel industry is like in their circles. I think that's something that I wasn't paying a lot of attention to previously, like making work that's in this kind of format that's more readily accessible to people, that's interactive and time-based, because that's what books are. So I'm happy to share that little update with you all. Thank you.